in 3, 2, 1. All right, and we're back with episode 4 of Discourses on Strivalism. We have a new microphone set up. I finally made an aggregate device out of our 2 microphones so we don't have to sit uncomfortably close to one another. Today's topic, as mentioned a lot last week, is going to be on Nietzsche, nihilism, but more specifically, his God is Dead epitaph, as it were.
Very potent line right there.
Absolutely.
A lot to unpack.
I think so, yeah. And so without any further ado, I'm just going to let my friend here go ahead and start on his introduction, and we're going to start in a rather more general opening and try to get into the specifics as our rabbit trails,
right,
rather than start specifically and just kind of go out, or start generally and just lose our way.
So I'll just set the topic for what we're going to talk about today. So the topic that I chose for this week is religion and the vacuum that it leaves as it recedes in society or civilization, or however you want to phrase that. And so what I mean by that is we're going to talk about religion just in general, what it does for people, the function of it, the form of it. But we're also going to talk about the lack of it, the lack of religion, because, as you see now, there are more non-believers than there ever have been. There are more atheists than there ever have been in the history of ever. So this is new, and so there clearly has to be some sort of consequence to what we're seeing now. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to start off by saying that I don't believe in God, but that doesn't mean that as an atheist I'm anti-God. I think a lot of people tend to misconstrue or misappropriate the difference between an atheist and a militant atheist, or someone who just hates God.
Maybe an anti-theist.
Yes, an anti-theist
right,
even.
Okay.
So I don't believe in God, but I believe in the power of God, and I'll get more into that as we go. Christianity, to me, is not any different than many other religions. I would say it's the one that has gained the most traction, and it's the one that we're going to talk about the most today because of where we live. We live in the United States. This is the predominant religion here, so this is going to be the most pertinent for us, and it's going to be the most pertinent for most people that are listening also. I want to just jump into it. People are vessels. So what do I mean by that? Well, we're just vessels. We can be filled with something. Now, does that mean that we have to be? Well, it does, because a cup isn't a cup unless it's designed to hold something. Well, religion is that something, or at least it has been. So what do you do if there's nothing in there? And that's where I'll start us off. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a utilitarian kind of approach.
Yeah.
Especially if we're going to go along with the cup analogy, right? The purpose of a cup is to hold liquid, for drinking or for pouring into another vessel or whatever. Right. And it's funny that you're talking about Christianity and you're calling us vessels. I mean, that analogy has been made within Christianity.
Itself,
yeah, the biblical context, as it were. But I think making it utilitarian, right? It having a purpose, right? Its purpose is to hold something, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that might be something interesting to go along with. What is our purpose? What are we supposed to hold? Or maybe why religion or why our spiritual life is considered to be fluid like liquid.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not honestly, I'm not sure where to go with that.
It's kind of why I asked it. It's kind of a difficult question because if you think about it, well, we can get into. I know you have a lot of notes on Nietzsche that we'll get to, but if you think about a Nietzschean way of thinking about that, well, if you don't believe in God, well, what do you have?
Yeah, the purposelessness of not having your cup filled.
Right.
The purposelessness that you would feel if you were the cup per se, if you are not fulfilling your purpose,
right,
that you feel quite empty. Maybe we should not stray away from that analogy, but maybe anthropomorphize it a little bit more, right? We are vessels in a way, right? And a cup is a perfect way to illustrate that, right? We are vessels, and it's vessels of meaning, essentially. You're talking about purpose and meaning. And I think we've already kind of dove. Yeah,
Dive?
we dived. We dived, but we dove, perhaps. I don't know. Not quite sure. English.
Jamie, pull that up.
Yeah, Jamie, pull it up. We talked about that in a recent podcast, that purpose and meaning have, well, different meanings. That our purpose might be more biological, factual, and without any gravitas to it, right? Without any metaphysics to it. Purpose is just biological.
Right.
But meaning is maybe something more, I did just say metaphysical, but meaning is something with more depth that we almost hold on to. It's more emotional. Mm-hmm. It's a lot less rigid. Because meaning is so different based off of what culture you have lived in. I mean, literally, your geographical location of your birth basically paints your whole life in front of you.
Right.
Right. Very seldom do people really move away from home and completely
uproot themselves.
Yeah, uproot themselves and re-identify themselves in a way that's not connected to their own culture. Right. And so there is a sense of meaning, and a lot of people will find it in temporary and materialistic pleasures, mm-hmm. or some people might even find it in understanding or connecting ideas. It's funny that we search for meaning in so many things that we forget maybe our ancestors just came up with the answer in these archetypal stories. And that's, to me, that seems to be what religion has done. Mm-hmm. And when I say religion, I'm also going to conflate the term with mythology, because it's all mythology to me.
Right.
Right. Christianity, Islam, the Greek pantheon, the Germanic pantheon, and the Hindu pantheon. All of those are just mythologies. Mm-hmm. Symbols for meaning, for maybe not just even correct action in life, but right. they're illustrated stories that give you something to live up to, live for, and live, in a sense, according to. And I think without those things, without meaning, oh yeah, we're definitely going into materialistic and temporary pleasures. And so many people, especially when Jordan Peterson, I always bring him up, but when Jordan Peterson was gaining popularity, so many people were saying, you're telling very simple things that I knew, but I had never put the words to. Mm-hmm. And it just completes me in such a way that motivates me to do something.
He was able to rationalize what a lot of people felt, but couldn't exactly articulate. And I think that's why he gained as much traction as he did.
Right. Especially with men, because we are a lot more obsessed with things and ideas. I'm not saying that women aren't. Okay, let's just get that out of the way.
They're just more...
I shouldn't have to go back and cover my own ass when I speak, but... no, men are more predisposed to those kinds of modes of thinking. And so that's why he touched base with so many.
Right.
Or hit home, whatever you
And why the vast majority of his base were men. And right. that's exactly why I said that people are vessels, is because it's something that we meaning I'm talking about is something that we continually yearn for. I mean, for the same reasons that you just said, all of these mythologies in years past, since the beginning of, written history, we've had some sort of mythology or some sort of system of storytelling about where we came from, why we exist, right. Why we do things or why we shouldn't do things.
Yeah.
It's something that we have to have. We're a vessel for it.
Mythology gives us, the cup, mm-hmm. something to hold onto, mm-hmm. as a cup holds onto right. its liquid. And I think that's a beautiful illustration that you've made, and I think it goes right along with, the Western cultural reference right. that it is already. So, I really think that religion played that role for a long time. And so now, without it, our cup is empty, and we don't know with what to fill it, mm-hmm. So, and
I think that creates, and that's the vacuum that I was talking about. So if we don't have religion to be a system for us, if we don't have religion to be a motivator or a source of meaning or purpose in life, then what do we have?
Right.
We've created this secular world where you may or may not need religion anymore for yourself, or at least you might not tell yourself you need it. But we've created this secular world where it's easier to fall away from religion as something that you don't need, but you do need it. You go a different direction with it. You know, if we don't have God to tell us, you know, what's right or wrong, or the teachings of God to tell us what's right or wrong, then I'm going to find something else that's going to tell me right or wrong. And if we have laws and institutions in place that establish right from wrong or good from bad, then we'll go with that. But it still leaves me devoid of the meaning and the purpose. You know, I'm not just a cog in a machine. I can be a cog in a machine and still have purpose and meaning if I believe in God. You know, that's good for the Industrial Revolution. It has been a disaster. But we'll get into that. But
Ted Kaczynski next week.
Right. But if I'm a cog in a machine, it's easier for me to do what I'm supposed to do. If I still have this idea to fall back on that, you know, I am loved, God is my creator, and that is my purpose and my meaning. But if I'm just a cog in a machine like modern life is now, but I don't have that meaning, then, you know, where do you go?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point that it is a system of valuation where...
Really axiological.
Yeah, I mean, if your values were in if you really valued the meaning of those things, right? And now you don't have that. Mm-hmm. What you value could be, as I said earlier, materialistic. And I think you become almost soulless when you give into that materialism. And I think that's why so many people just seem drained or bereft of meaning altogether, is because they are empty. And there's nothing in our civilization that's really providing that. And so people are... It's a cliche. They're just stuffing the emptiness with money and work and women and things, you know? Like it's just... They're not looking in the right spot for motivation for higher ideals.
It's like a negative existentialism almost, because, like we were saying earlier, we've yearned. Man yearns for this.
Yeah.
All the time.
Well, I think it's definitely, as Nietzsche prophesied, that once you take the spirit out of a man, right, you take his meaning and purpose away from him, that he'll become a nihilist. And what a nihilist really is someone who acts according to his wants and desires, even in a self-destructive manner. That's what I always think of when I think of the nihilist.
Right.
Well, nothing really matters in the end, so let's just do this. And Nietzsche himself called it a poison. I mean, he wasn't saying indignantly that, oh, God is dead. You know, he wasn't saying it with his chest puffed out. He was, you know...
It was a stark and
it
dark
was a very
realization.
Somber realization that now with industry and science, we will find that we are not connected to the world in the same way that we used to be. And so now what do? God is dead and we have killed him. We did that. It wasn't God left or... oh, he just never was real to begin with. We killed him. We killed our connection with a higher mode of being. We severed ourselves from a unifying meaning. Now, of course, it's taken a century and a half almost to go about that. In my opinion, we are at the point, and this is... Nietzsche influenced Spengler quite a bit. So this is more Spenglerian, if you will. The West is dead. And we are simply living in its bloated and rotting corpse, mimicking life. We're mimicking life with all this booming economy and buying things. Mm-hmm. And all we're doing in that time is just waiting on the imminent collapse. And so...
And everyone feels that too.
Right.
I feel it, you feel it, and a lot of people listening feel it too.
Right. Well, everyone should feel that. I don't know how to put this. I don't know how to transition to this idea. We all feel it. Each election cycle is more salvational than the last.
Yes,
because
that's a good
we
way
are
of
no longer
putting it.
seeking salvation from elsewhere, because there is no meaning outside of what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so our salvation is coming from what we can piece together.
Right.
And really our salvation only comes in the form of someone who says they're going to save the economy. It's only going to be in the form of someone who saves the border or saves the jobs or it's very materialistic things that we're thinking about. It's a lot of times people are still thinking long term, but as we are living this materialistic and pleasure filled life, we're waiting on the imminent collapse of
Right.
Western civilization, because the framework, the buttresses, the church, the meaning that was holding everything together,
And the institutions that supported it.
of course, they are under attack. They're crumbling, rotting and decaying. And so when it finally collapses, right, we're going to become, in a sense, cultural orphans. And when we are cultural orphans, we're going to seek adoption. We're either going to go in the route of self-destruction so that we run ourselves into chaos. We're going to become the drunk or drug-addicted people. We're not going to have any meaning. We're completely empty. Our vessel, our soul,
Right.
is empty. Soulless people running around. I call those the slaves. When I talk about strivalism and I talk about who the strivalist, the worker, and the slave is. I know I haven't mentioned that much on this podcast. We'll get there.
We will get there. It's very interesting stuff.
When we become soulless, it's completely self-destructive. Living completely... You're almost living life with a gas can, an open gas can in one hand and a torch in the other. Everywhere you go, you will burn to the ground. Right? Or we could become the cultural orphans that get adopted, and we adopt another culture, religion, something that fills us, because we're so desperate for meaning that we might not come up with something else. We'll just pick up, and I am predicting that Islam will be the major religion in Europe and America, Canada, Australia, the Western world.
Right.
Will probably submit to Islam before anything else, if nothing changes from the way it is. Right. I might be a doomsayer for that. I'm just that's a prediction that I have, and I think there were a lot of French thinkers in the 60s, right wing thinkers in the 60s, 70s, and 80s from France, that saw the same thing.
It coincided with the Algerian fight for independence too.
Well, right.
It was very real for them.
Right. Well, and now, looking at just immigration alone into Europe, it's majority Muslim. I'm not dogging on that. If you look in the history of Europe, that sounds terrible. If you look at the history of humankind, if you will,
It's really not all that.
It's not unheard of. I'm predicting that in the sense that I almost want to block it by saying it's going to happen. I'm ironically saying it in a sense because I don't want it to happen.
Right.
Right. Because I don't want to become a cultural orphan. I don't want the West to die, but it is.
And we need to embrace it.
Well, right, and I think we need to embrace this chaos, because the third option, and I'm not saying these are the only three options, these are just predictions that I'm kind of shooting at.
Right.
But the third option, instead of becoming a cultural orphan and being adopted, we could become mature. We can build a new civilization, something different than the iterations before, and become stronger because of it. And in a sense, we almost purify ourselves through that chaos, because we know what caused our downfall. We shan't do it again. Mm-hmm. When we lay down a new foundation, and people after us start building up the pillars, and they build up the roof, as it were, and they build more layers upon it, right? And I think that is the role that the strivalist should play in the next centuries. And I think it's very important to understand it's not necessarily the idea of the phoenix, where it's cyclical in nature and it's just the same bird over again. No, no, no. When we rise from the ashes, as it were, from this imminent collapse of our colossus, right? Once that body collapses, it's going to take a serious transfiguration of men to overcome such chaos. I mean, and I myself prescribe that the strivalist is necessary to do that. And I definitely believe that if we can lay down the foundation for the strivalist that motivates people in the future, fills his cup knowing that he has purpose and that meaning is not something tangible.
Mm-hmm.
That meaning is only in the mind and things like that. But it's not subjective. It's objective. That's
right.
why there's archetypal heroes
right.
that almost transcend culture in a sense. I mean, I think there's a reason why the Western world picked up essentially Judaism. We picked up, people still, talk about Moses and Abraham and, Old Testament figures, right. David and Goliath. I mean, that's like a quintessential idea, the underdog, right?
Right.
Not to say that those are Jewish creations. They picked them up from somewhere else.
Right.
But the fact that those can be transcultural in that way, that those ideas can still have meaning throughout different cultures that were diametrically opposed to each other at one point.
It's interesting that these, because you bring up these, archetypal stories. They're stories that we can all feel. We all know them. We've experienced them in some way. All of us have been the underdog in some sort of situation. All of us have been in a situation that you can apply those stories, those parallels
right.
to. And that's why they're relevant, because we can derive our meaning and our connection to the story. We're all part of the story because other people have done the same thing.
Right. That's why you can suspend disbelief when you go to the movie and you see somebody stick their hand out and a piece of metal flies out of the ice and into their hand and it ignites and it's just a beam of light and they can slice off a Wampa's arm. Like we sit there in the theater. I mean,
it's a Star Wars reference.
Another Star Wars reference, everybody. That was essential in my life.
Yes.
That's why I always bring it up.
Absolutely.
I mean, but no, I think that's why you can go to the movie theater and you can watch animals talking. They're speaking right. English, and you're sitting there going like,
yep.
"Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with this," and you stare at it for 2 hours, and you sit there and you go, "Wow!" Like, if you are a deeper person and you like meaning and things like that, like you ponder on that a little bit, like, "Wow, that's a good story," and it makes you want to watch it again, even if you maybe don't know the levels of language
right.
that we were talking about earlier. If you don't know the secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Yeah. If you don't know those levels of language, that idea was still conveyed to you whether you knew it or
right.
not subliminally. And so you'll sit there and you go, that's a great movie. I really like it. It has something to it. That's called gravitas. It draws you near to it. It has a profound depth to it. You don't know what it is. Maybe you don't know. Maybe you're just passively watching it. But the people that made it knew what they were doing.
Right.
And that's why storytellers are such a important thing in human culture. I actually have a piece here that I wrote in December 2019, and it's titled "The Importance of Myths and Mythology in the Development of Youth." Right. And so I'm just going to read it directly. I'm going to read it in its totality, and then maybe you'll have a response.
Yeah.
When one thinks of myths, the mind instantly relates the word to falsehoods, lies, and misguiding ideas. Oh, that's just a myth. That couldn't be further from the truth. A myth is not a made-up piece of fiction used to entertain or frighten children around a campfire, but rather they serve as cautionary tales, as Peter Jackson put it in an interview when he was talking about Star Wars. They are so carefully and thoughtfully put together and crafted in order to teach valuable lessons on loyalty, courage, fidelity, and honor. Not to mention, they can teach from the character's mistakes before someone in real life has to learn for themselves.
Right.
They also give great insight into the values and prehistory of a people before written tradition. Therefore, why do so many value a hero from humble beginnings? Is it to show that any man with a bit of courage and purity can rise above his surroundings? One thinks of King Arthur or King David, Luke, Frodo. All have this aura of simplicity, purity, and courage. But not all heroes always do what's right. Luke's father, Anakin, another Star Wars reference, sacrificed all that he knew for power in order to save his wife. But it came from his deep wishes to be powerful and need for control, right? So his ethics were messed up, but his morality was in line.
It's a good nod to our last episode.
Right. Sorry, I said I wouldn't interrupt myself, but I have to make these connections when I see them. Before this program, we were talking about how we can't sit and watch historical movies without pausing and referencing.
Yes.
It's a necessity. You have to connect ideas. We're storytellers. Right. We're telling stories right now.
Essentially.
I'm going on to say Faust made a bargain that ended up that he ended up not wanting. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Faust, I lost my space. So I tried to... Yeah, Faust made a bargain that he ended up not wanting. Icarus flew too high. Midas turned all he loved into gold. The heroes of stories, we can learn from their mistakes. These failings of heroes warn us of our greed and lust, for not all that are given opportunities choose the right thing. Not everything that is mythic is false. Although untrue, it contains the truth that requires teachers to interpret, as Obi-Wan would have interpreted the Force, or as Merlin interpreted Arthur's quest. So too do I feel the need to guide others to their journey, hence why I write. That's it.
I like that. I really like that. And I like the point that you made that we're storytellers and that these stories are valuable in and of themselves. And what stuck out to me when you were saying that is these stories, these myths, these parables even, they transcend you. They transcend me. They transcend all who read them. Yeah, because if I do something, if you and I, we do something and there's a story to be told there, other people are going to know. But we die. And that story will get lost as the people that know that story die. But the story of Midas, the story of, Icarus, all of these ancient myths, or even more recent myths like Star Wars or, the Lord of the Rings, these are archetypal stories that transcend you and transcend me. So someone who watches those movies in time, they'll understand the same things that we do. And those stories will continue even after they die. So it's myth and meaning and I don't want to say purpose. It's myth and meaning that transcends the individual. It passes through you.
Right.
It isn't you. It passes through you. But you can manifest it.
It binds us. It surrounds us. Penetrates us.
Yes.
I particularly liked what you said, and that it transcends us. And I could only think of, even if in name and not physically, the storytellers still live on with us because their story that they told and how pure they kept the story and how refined it was. And I kept thinking to myself, everything that we do, we almost do in a sense to preserve ourselves. Anything that we do worthwhile is done in a sense to preserve ourselves, right? And I can only help but think, this is quite pessimistic, and I might go down a really sad hole here. It would be a travesty if all of this was for naught, and if we didn't go out into the universe and someone somewhere out there could just find a fragment of our existence. Something similar to just a hand up on a cave that's painted on there that says, I was here, I existed. Mm-hmm. And maybe not so much maybe we were here, we existed. Mm-hmm. And truly, truly, truly believe that mythology is not some created fiction, perhaps the heroes of these stories were real people. Perhaps some of their magic abilities and things like that are exaggerated. But I think these people, the gods, may have been real people at one time. And that their accomplishments were so worthy. Their wisdom so in line with the perfect mode, ideal mode of being, that it's worth telling about. And so King Arthur lives on.
Right.
And, you know, we want to survive so desperately. I think that's part of the biological imperative, that the more of the emotion, and somewhat rational, but this is more emotion wise, that that emotion maybe, I don't know how to put it. The emotion serves the purpose of the biological imperative to kind of survive beyond the physical body.
I think it's something that stuck out to me as you were saying that, is talking about religion specifically. When I believe in something, going back to earlier where we were talking about we yearn for meaning, we yearn for purpose, a lot of that I think has to do with our fear of mortality, our awareness and our fear of our own mortality. So if I believe in God, if I have that faith, it means that I am part of this ethereal, transcendental story, this ethereal, transcendental thing. I have to be part of something that is above me, because if I'm not, I'm just immortal.
So would you maybe consider this thought, that our spirituality is almost predicated on our will towards self-preservation?
Oh, absolutely.
I think
I would agree
that's
with
a
that.
fair thing to suggest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've never really thought about that. But obviously it's quite clear. You believe in God so that you can live forever. I think a lot of people, they want to live forever, and a lot of people think that they might live forever.
Quite literally, with heaven and hell.
Right. Well, and heaven and hell is just kind of like, well, you're going to live forever anyway, so where are you going to end up?
Right.
Because maybe, now this is me just off the top of my head, pulling stuff out of my ass, but it's like, well, I don't think the way you lived was good enough that you should just live forever and be okay. I mean, that's a Western heaven and hell kind of concept, but there are Indo-European religions, like Hinduism and the Greek pantheon. Like, you go to the underworld and get purified. Yeah, you go to the underworld and get purified. So it's not an eternal damnation, but there is some sort of punishment for what you do in life. And I think that the morality that we get from mythology, the reason why it's almost so heavy on morality is that it wants you, well, acting correctly helps life here do a little bit more well.
Yeah. It helps all of us. It's a way of enforcing the good.
Yeah, it's not the morality that we were talking about last week that seems beyond humanity or the human species. I think it's the morality, the minutia, the little morals that we've kind of created. Like the Catholic Church talks about, these are cardinal sins, and these are just other sins.
Yeah, average, everyday little white sins.
Yeah, so I think that might be where people built up those little moralities, because that would just essentially, in a non-secular or church and state separated world, laws would just be religiously derived, and
as they have been prior to the Enlightenment era.
Yeah, for almost the entirety of humanity, since we've contrived something greater than ourselves. I mean, that's kind of been the origin of the laws, right? The gods gave us the laws. I mean, it's usually the main god, the lawgiver, the wise one.
I would even go so far as to say that really it's even more recent than that. I wouldn't even, I know I said the Enlightenment before, but I would go so far as to say that, this is kind of a hot take, the United States is the first country to really have that real separation of church and state that is actually enforced, at least in idea. Because sure, our founding principles were uniquely Christian.
Right.
It wasn't really...
Well, it came from almost 2,000
Yes.
years of Christian
Of Western
presuppositional
thought, right.
worldview. Yeah, it all culminated in that.
But as the United States has grown, it has not been openly hostile legally. I'll cover myself.
Oh, yeah,
there.
yeah.
Openly hostile legally to not following Christian doctrine to a T. You know, you could be a Muslim and live in the United States in 1800. It wouldn't be easy for you, but you could do so legally.
Yeah.
That's not quite how it was in Europe prior to that.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. And it depends on what country you were in Europe at those times, because if you were on the border with the Ottoman Turks, it was different. Yeah, you were probably very close-minded about things, and I'm not saying that you should be open-minded to foreign ideologues or anything,
right.
But you know, I mean, obviously you want to learn about them and things like that. You know, you just want to be a generally well-rounded person in terms of knowledge, but yeah, I mean, some people like the exoticness of something foreign, and that's who I'm talking about when I talk about cultural orphans that get adopted by, you know, they need something, and they tend to actually adopt foreign things anyway.
Right.
And so that's what they'll do in a collapse, if you will. Speaking of religion, I brought this up before the podcast, that, you know, we talk about how, like, maybe the gods kind of deigned down to us and they gave us the laws and things like that because we were incapable of doing it. I'm going to take more of the approach of the atheist, where, okay, we came up with religion. We came up with this mythology and idealizing people or emotions to become. So this might be a little more motivating for some people as well. I actually might want to read it directly from something.
Once you're done with that, I actually have some writing of my own on that same subject. So
yeah. So the idea that man can conceive of and build up deities more perfect than he means that man himself is divine in a sense. He has within him a spark of divinity, and that can be amplified. And the amplification of those ideals into separate deities that can be evoked in rituals or through prayer or meditation for specific needs is probably the foundation and nature of polytheism, right? And so let me go back. I just said that we all have the spark of the divine within us because of our capability to create these ideals, these gods, right? We can come up with that. That should give us a little bit of motivation and hope that we can push ourselves. We have the power. We have the ability to create and do that, right? I mean, I think it's a brilliant idea to give someone that kind of power, that creative energy, things like that. Now, that sounded so new age, but I mean that in the sense that we came up with those things. It's not foreign to us.
No, absolutely not.
You need to grab the reins of that, rein it in, and you need to drive that forward. Use that as your vessel, your vehicle in which to push yourself past your own limits that you've only imposed upon yourself. Impose duty and responsibility upon yourself to strengthen yourself, to push through the next barrier. That is the purpose of strivalism.
That's strivalism 101.
You're constantly striving, because if you're not strengthening yourself, you're only weakening. You plateau and decay. And you're not doing it for yourself.
Atrophy.
Right, yeah, you go into a state of atrophy. You're not strengthening yourself for yourself. You're strengthening it for the next generation so that you may vicariously live through them, right? I know that sounded kind of cliche, but strivalism isn't only the scientific perpetuation of genes and the species, it's the preservation of the fire. Because what a shame that it would be that the light of human consciousness goes extinct without any smoke.
Right.
Preserve the fire. Push it forward. I think the symbol for strivalism should be a fire. A consuming fire that constantly needs to be fed by oneself. I think the sacrifice, the perpetual self-sacrifice, should be represented as you are but a log to the fire. But be a big log. Be a good tree that grows so it can burn long and well. Excellent. To warm the generations after yourself, to make light for the future so they can see, and to make warmth so that they can grow and stay alive. I think that's the purpose of it. And the purpose of strivalism isn't necessarily to build up all of humanity. To be honest, we don't want to be part of humanity. Humanity is a French Enlightenment ideal that it pushes us down. It flattens us into a nebulous and formless mass, right? We need to build ourselves up. There needs to be great civilizations and there needs to be civilizations that aren't so great. You have to have the comparison. If you flatten everybody, we are all nothing. You have to give some people something and some people nothing. I'm not saying to go out and pillage and imperialize. I'm just saying we can't afford to continuously squander our resources on those that walk with a gas can in one hand and a torch in the other. There comes a point in time when helping those who don't even help themselves is profoundly stupid.
I agree. I think that was very eloquently put.
This is something that I've said for years. I've written so much about that. That is my passion in strivalism. Yeah. That's why I want to do. That's why I want to write and I want to publish things. I need to get this idea out there because if strivalism doesn't, what's the purpose of me having read all these books? All these men knew at some point in history that someone that needed to read their work would read it and run with it, right? And build it together. All right, we had some technical difficulties there, but as I was saying, it would be a shame that all these writers, they knew in the future that they would be read by someone like myself and like authors before me that would take their idea and culminate it or bring something new to it and build on it, right? It would be a shame for me to have read all these things and come to these conclusions and to not pass that on with something built on top of it that might be worthwhile. It doesn't matter really if it is the right answer. What matters is that somebody read, understood, interpreted, and developed something from it. Mm-hmm. And it would be irresponsible if I didn't share with the world my thoughts. I wasn't really given these thoughts. They were bestowed upon me by people before me. No idea that I have is original. But in order to preserve the fire, I should pass it along. I shouldn't squander it. That is the opposite of imposing responsibilities on the self. I think it's probably a heavy burden that I am now responsible for maybe building something. Like, it is almost a terrible burden, and I can see why so many men, when they want meaning in life and they start getting it and they start thinking about important things, they become burdened. Don't be discouraged by such a burden. Become empowered by it. Like, it's almost as if you have been divinely chosen, by random chance in reality. You have been...
Duck, duck, goose.
Right. You have been chosen, in a sense. Like, your destiny has intertwined you with these things. This is such a great calling. This is what will bring not only meaning to your life, but countless others around you for generations if you do something worthy. And your name would live on. If your name doesn't live on, your actions will have influenced the future. Mm. You live on because of the the consequences that you've created. Now make them good. Make them good consequences. Make them something that people can benefit from forever.
Right.
I think it's a beautiful thing to read and to write, because unpublished works amount to failed intentions and failed capabilities.
Even if you do write and you are able to manifest a collection of your ideas, even if in the future you're considered wrong, or whoever's listening, if they're writing, if they're considered wrong, your work will still be mentioned as something to not do. So even if it isn't good, even if it's bad, it's still contributing to the good because it's used as a reference.
Right. And, that's not to say that, write something bad.
Oh, no, absolutely
it's,
not.
Write something that is meaningful and worth contemplating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, honestly, if you do it, and not with the right intentions, but if you just do it, and you've thought very hard on things, and you've almost gotten the opinion of others, be it if they were dead and they published something, or with peers, find people that are like-minded and that will push you. You need to have competition. That's another aim of the strivalist, is to constantly be sharpening himself amongst other people. So don't run away from the world because it's against you. Use that as a sharpening, like a whetstone.
If you're putting together a puzzle and you pick up two pieces and you go to put them together and they don't fit, you don't give up. Oh, these pieces don't fit. Right. Where am I supposed to start? No. You now know that those two pieces don't fit together. And they fit with other things.
I think it's funny that, Nietzsche kind of set the tone for this, and thus spoke Zarathustra. But, Ernst Jünger talked about this as well. Ernst called it the Waldgänger, which is someone who essentially runs to the forest. He's a forest fleer, as it were. And so because of his affinities, because of his love for things that aren't materialistic, because he's different than society, they may not force him out, but he is forced out. And so he goes he goes by himself and is in the wood, right? And I think when people become like that, they become afraid to almost seek out others, right? I guarantee you that in the woods, you will find more people. Now, okay, I know I'm talking in many, many layers, maybe. Once you become, I'm not talking about necessarily a social outcast, but maybe more so an intellectual outcast. You might be against society. Once you start thinking on your own, you become independent rather than an individual. Mm-hmm. You'll find that there are a lot of independents out there, and you need not be afraid of them. Ernst Jünger in the 20s and 30s was amongst every intellectual circle possible. Mm-hmm. He hung out with communists. He hung out with National Socialists. When I say hang out, I make him sound like best friends with these people. He was interested in them.
Acquainted with.
He was interested in them and with their ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that he was friends with Salvador Dali, Pablo Picasso, several German communists. I don't know off the top of my head what became of them. We can all imagine. But his works, his writings were so inspiring to so many different groups, right? It even got to the point where in Germany, I think it was in the 30s, Heinrich Himmler himself asked Ernst Jünger, he said, you are one of the embodiments of the National Socialist and the spirit of it, which to me tells me that Himmler never really read anything that Ernst wrote. So when they offered Ernst Jünger a position in the Reichstag, he said, I would not, I think, I can't translate it like outright, but it was something around or along the lines of, I would rather not be amongst 10,000 idiots. I thought that was quite interesting. Quite logical.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Ernst Jünger was all about being the anarch. Not an anarchist, but
an anarch.
He's by himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's beyond. He's apolitical. He doesn't. Ernst Jünger was not passive in viewing the world. He was very active in it. He served in both world wars and did his role. And he I'm not bragging about this or thinking it in a positive light. I'm just stating what he's done. He discovered insects and amoebas. Like, he was great. He was big into beetles. He also knew the doctor that discovered LSD, Dr. Albert Hoffman. He isolated the hallucinogenic
I had read that somewhere, yeah.
psilocybin cubensis, the mushroom, and once he isolated the hallucinogenic, he and Ernst Jünger, they tripped on acid, if you will, like back in the 50s, I think.
Yeah.
They thought it would expand the mind of humanity, and so they thought it was going to keep humanity at the same pace as technology, and it ended up not. And Dr. Albert Hoffman later in life wrote LSD, My Problem Child. That was like his book towards the end of his life. But Ernst Jünger was in the scene of everything in the early 20th through mid 20th century. He was amongst everything. And I'm surprised that he's not mentioned so much. I mean, look, I have all these books.
It's possible that a lot of it has to do with the contextual history that he was a part of.
Right. I can imagine.
But really, I mean, just from the things that he was a part of and the things that he did, he is a definition strivalist.
Well, in many ways, yeah. I mean, obviously no one's perfect. I can't say that, yes, he is the strivalist. But he quite literally is. He has the
qualities of.
He's a proto-strivalist, in a sense. Like,
proto-strivalist.
Yeah, I mean, well, he was the first author that I ever read, and I read it on my own. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't have to do it for school, and I didn't have to, like, I don't know. We read All Quiet on the Western Front in school as a, we were talking about World War I, but it was the centennial of, it was August 1914.
Yeah.
And, when we started school that year. And so we read that, but something about All Quiet on the Western Front interested me in understanding that the history wasn't just dates and names and things like that. Like, people lived it. Mm-hmm. So, and they must have written down what they thought. I used to think that All Quiet on the Western Front was nonfiction. I thought that Paul Boehmer was actually a real human.
Right.
Like, that was an autobiographical account. I didn't realize until the very end when it was like, oh, he died. I was like, oh. But then I read Storm of Steel because I was interested in World War I. But I was interested in who was there. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, ever since, I have almost every single Ernst Jünger book that could possibly have been in English. I even have biographies about him. And, his correspondences with Martin Heidegger, and I have.
I was reading about Heidegger today. Very interesting guy.
Isn't that interesting that we always come across the same guys without even communicating with each other?
I was reading about Husserl actually, but okay. Husserl influenced Heidegger, which is an interesting dynamic because Heidegger was a fervent Nazi, and Husserl was a Jew.
Yeah. Very
interesting to read the dynamic there. But Husserl had a lot of interesting ideas, and it influenced Heidegger, and then Heidegger kind of extrapolated from there.
Isn't it funny though that a lot of the people that were at in that time, they didn't realize that everything is temporary. They don't. Mm-hmm. Nobody really realizes that they're in history when they're in the present, right? That they will eventually be. They will eventually be somebody's ancestors. That this will eventually just be history, right?
It makes me think of the meme, with Squidward. You've seen the Squidward, and he's wearing a button, and it says whatever you want to put on it. Yeah. Well, I saw a meme, this was a while back, of I'm tired of living through a major historical event right now.
Yeah.
And because there have been so many seemingly major historical events just within the past couple of years. I mean, We had a worldwide pandemic, if you can call it that. We had...
Plandemic.
We had, the death of the Queen. We had the first war between European countries in a while.
Yeah.
Is very, very
since the 90s,
major.
though.
Yeah. Major events that we're living through and that we're experiencing, 50 years from now, when we're talking about how life was in our days.
Yeah.
These are going to be things that people read in history books. Very interesting stuff.
Right. So what fascinated me about people like Heidegger and Jung and Carl Jung and things like that is that sometimes they seem to be out of time or above time,
Mm-hmm.
as it were. They seem to see kind of beyond the present and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of say things for what they were at face value.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know. Sometimes you can read what they wrote, and they weren't motivated by like it wasn't an emotional response what they wrote.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't contrarian either. It just seemed to be. I wish I had a specific example.
Well, philosophers in general are like that, which is interesting because they're not removed from context. So if you take, the French existentialists, if you have Sartre and Camus, their ideas are reflective of their time, but their ideas are also they take a step back and examine their time, but it still applies to wherever on the timeline you're on.
Yeah.
So Heidegger, Husserl, Schopenhauer, you name them, you can read what they're saying and you can apply it to the now, just as it applied to their now, just as it applies to the past from them.
You know what I actually find funny is I'm looking at my library, and a lot of the authors in there were authors from the turn of the last century. And so these are men that were probably born in the late 1800s, and they lived through and died in the 20th century, right, in the 1900s. They lived through probably the strangest transformation of between the old world order and the new world order, if you will. The old world was embedded with or in religion,
yes,
and mysticism, and unknown realms, if you will. There was still a little mystery to the world. You had to see things only through illustration. Photography wasn't so big yet. I mean, obviously we had it, but it wasn't like every photo taken could instantly be seen across the world. And then all of that came crashing down at in the aftermath of World War I, because you had a total mobilization of everyone. I mean, peasants and rich men. Everyone was completely mobilized. Every facet of society was fixated on technological progress. I think that's what. Oh, excuse me. I think that's what Nietzsche was saying. I think that's what he was prophesying. Was that just like Faust, we will come to the point where what was old and what brought us here, we will sever from ourselves, and we will start moving forward, and almost we're being dragged along by technological progress now. We're not being anchored back by tradition.
Right.
And so by the severing of ourselves from tradition and from what kind of kept us grounded, we have lost our way. We no longer know where we are, because we went so fast, so quickly. And that with the vanishing of the old order, right, our cup ran dry.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to bring it back in. And so God is dead. And what are we supposed to do without him?
I'd like to read something that I wrote that was a perfect segue, actually. So, whereas in previous ages, I talk about man, where in previous ages he leaned on God or saw gods or experienced God or gods, he doesn't anymore. Advancements in science and observation have forced the supernatural and the spiritual into the corner. Since the invention of the camera, there has never been a miracle. You don't see videos of angels, but you have people in the past that talked about angels. That's what I mean when I say that advancements in science and observation have forced the supernatural and the spiritual into the corner. We now know that God or gods or the supernatural don't exist in the physical world. They can be real for you, but they don't exist. You don't experience them in a physical way like people in the past did. This isn't to say that they're not important, or at least in their essence and function rather than their form. While they may not exist in the physical world, their power and influence is still material insofar as the motivational structure they provide. Their essence and function is to motivate, inspire, control, unite, to provide comfort, and to gift existential self-assurance. These needs are so inseparable with man that when he eliminates one god, he only comes to serve another. What does one do without such answers? Much like a man may cut off one end of his blanket and sew it onto the other to make it longer, man eliminating God or a higher authority to make himself more free or enlightened truly changes nothing. Merely he finds another entity to serve penitently. So from this, it should be self-explanatory that finding a belief system to adopt is paramount to the health and success of any person. You are empty without the ideal, and so you must be fully self-aware of your needs and shortcomings as to grow and nurture your soul. So therein lies the problem.
I think it was brilliant because that illustrated what I was talking about, because we have to have something to motivate us, or else we are destroyed. Go back and read.
Actually, I have something else I'd like to get to.
Yeah, go back and read that last part again where you were talking about where we need... you were talking about where we need something in order to motivate. I can't remember the words exactly.
I wrote, he is empty without the ideal and must be fully self-aware of his needs and shortcomings as to grow and nurture his soul.
Right. He needs to... Something about maybe adopting. He needed to adopt.
Oh, it should be self-explanatory that finding a belief system to adopt is paramount to the health and success of any man.
Right.
And actually, I'll add on here. It is so abundantly clear that man has an insatiable need for an idea or figure to serve, which in serving instills in him a higher meaning than him. He himself cannot do it alone. With all the complexities of life and existence on this planet, the feeling of being a part of an ethereal purpose which is greater than the self provides clarity within such complexity. And like we were talking about earlier, being a part of that ethereal purpose, it helps you with your mortality or your ideas of your mortality. So why is it no surprise that man has always come to develop and worship deities? Not one civilization in the history of man has lacked them. That is until now, as we come to kill God, as Nietzsche was talking about. He has always had a power and ideal higher than himself. But can we even say that he doesn't have these gods anymore? Does he not worship consumerism, freedom, hedonism, sexuality, and material wealth? Is he not on his knees in absolute submission to this insatiable pursuit of pleasure? Man needs these characters to worship, to see meaning in himself. Yet these characters, as we have seen, take their toll on his integrity and his dignity, cannot remain above him. This is God. He has lost his directing, guiding, spiritual force, which had so motivated him in the past for greatness. He has become simply a blob of lethargy and weakness.
Yeah, that goes exactly along with what I was saying about why men in the future might adopt something else. They might, as orphans, become adopted by an already established thing. Because mankind, we need meaning. I think it's something that feeds into our emotion. And emotion almost has to kind of filter itself because we have emotional actions that do not necessarily align themselves with the biological imperative, right? That's why the idea of sin exists, is because we can definitely miss the mark and not live up to correct being,
right?
Ideal being, right? And so, yeah, with that, I think... Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement. I'm in complete agreement that mankind needs something in order to propel itself.
It's also cautionary as well, because when you think about it, what if I don't have God, or if I don't have a belief system from years past, then, well, what do I adopt? Or what adopts me? But you have to be careful as to what you adopt, because like I was saying, if you're going to worship consumerism or sexuality, if that's, when I say worship, I mean it consumes you. That is your identity.
Yeah.
It is what gives you your meaning and your purpose in your day-to-day life. So for a lot of people, that is their own sexuality, or their finances, or their money, or their brand. But is that fulfilling, or is it just temporal? Is it a temporal idea or a temporal ideal that you strive for that really doesn't improve you? It doesn't improve the people around you. It just, I don't know how to word that. It doesn't sharpen the mind. It allows it to roam free.
Ah. Maybe that's not something I had thought about. It's quite an interesting point.
Actually, I have something else on
I
that as well.
I want to go off on something, because earlier I had mentioned that you have that spark of the divinity within you.
Mm-hmm.
That is great, but that is not to go insofar as the deification of the self. I want to warn people heavily about that form of narcissism, where, if I have this spark of the divine within me, everything that I do is in line with good. That's narcissistic. That's the deification of the self. When you do that, okay, let me back up. If you are a narcissist, if you have this deification of the self, right, you will tend to believe that every idea that comes in your head is a good idea and is therefore of equal value to everything else. And that how dare anyone question the value of your actions, let's say. I really want to find a quote that I have. Okay, yeah. Just because a thought appears in your head does not mean it's correct, nor should it be assumed worthy of pursuit. The deification of the self allows for all ideas to be seen as correct and thereby must be acted upon, period. Narcissistic, period. I wrote that in August. It was just a quick thought that I had at work. And I think that's why there are institutions of belief, right? And a lot of people go for different reasons, but a lot of the reasons are just so that they can get to heaven, right? They want to believe. And so I have this written. What is the purpose of your belief? Do you seek enlightenment? Do you seek to alleviate suffering? Do you seek peace? The Nietzschean seeks to create ever greater men. This ideal shines like a star above, illuminating the path we tread. Overcoming as devotion to this creed. That's overcoming, the
Right.
overcoming of anything is the devotion to this creed, right? We seek to affirm life itself in our stance by working so that it may reach its highest potential in us or our descendants. I wouldn't wish you to take my suffering from me if you could, and in fact I wish to take on even more suffering. To see an even greater man, I wish to see us experience more joy and more pain. Life is struggle, and only in an ever-increasing battle is mankind truly elevated. Peace, I'd rather a sacred war. I want my life to be more intense, more painful, and more profound. I want to increase everything that makes me alive, and I want to increase everything that brings the light of consciousness brighter. Alleviate suffering? No, I would rather use my suffering.
Motivational structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to...
It's a craving.
Life is predicated upon suffering, right? Everything you do is either to alleviate suffering or to cause it or to prevent it.
Yes.
Life is a
suffering.
struggle.
Yes.
It always has been, always will be. It's always been an uphill battle. That's why it's called mountain probable when we talk about the struggle of existence and evolution, right? You're trying to get up to the highest peak so that you can almost be beyond the chaos and entropy that is the law of nature, right? You're trying to get beyond that, and it's just this constant uphill struggle. You'll never get past it. But without that struggle, there is no strength to overcome. I mean, the adapt, improvise, overcome, that is strivalism. I think there's something beautiful in these different ideologues from the 20th century that really, they wanted to elevate mankind with technology, but what ended up happening was that we are crushed and shackled by it. It limits us in our mental and spiritual pursuits because we are so fixated on what is on the ground and what we can do here that we forget. We want to repeat the process over and over and over again. We want to. That's why factories are so monotonous and why people almost lose their minds in factories is because it's the same thing day in and day out. There is no time for you to look up from your feet and to look up at the stars,
right?
In a way. And I talked about the slave earlier, the slave mentality. That's the worker mentality, is that your obsession with temporary and materialistic pleasures is preventing you from going beyond your self-imposed limitations.
Mm-hmm.
You are limited by, somebody else stronger than I will do it because I'm not willing to perpetually sacrifice those pleasures.
Yeah, it's not a physical incapability. It's a mental unwillingness to look above yourself.
Well, and there is something to be said about all of our ancestors combined, right? Is that mentality of, picking yourself up by your bootstrap, like something has to be done. Mm-hmm. You have to do something. I mean, it's almost as if they lived out their biological imperative much greater than we do. I don't know why we're so disconnected from it, but I think, to bring it all back in, that, God wasn't dead for them. The colossus of Western civilization that almost is worshipped as a god now, right, is collapsing around us. We don't realize it yet. Not many people see it. I feel like I'm the mortician of the West. I have to declare that this body is dead. I feel like somebody has to do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have to be real about this, that we have, it's been a failure. I don't know. I can't honestly tell you where Western civilization started. Sometimes I look at it like, okay, it's a series of civilizations and collapses. We are not in reality the inheritors of Mesopotamia. I think that's more of an 17th and 18th century British invention. Mm-hmm. This Western civilization that's kind of inherited Egypt and Greece and things like that. We have simply adopted what maybe not what worked for them, but what was aesthetic about them, right? What seemed to be the glorious thing, right?
Well, and if you think about it, most civilizations are just the snowball effect.
Right. And so I think that Western civilization, as it stands right now, is the snowball effect from the printing press.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's information. It's information and technologically based. I think. Because it used to be that different countries kind of competed against each other with different weapons and different armor. And then all of a sudden now it's streamlined. Everyone's almost wearing the same camouflage pattern. Everyone has basically the same helmets and the NATO rounds and things like that. I mean, now there's some practicality to having like items when you're allies and stuff. Yeah, standardization. But, I mean, we all use the same kind of technology. We're all using the same kind of electricity. It's like there has to be another form of energy that we're not using. We just don't...
Fusion.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to derail us for 30 seconds. Have you seen the development in the quest for nuclear fusion.
Actually, I believe there was something that just happened the other day, last week
Yes.
or so. Actually, yeah, I do want to take a pause, and I want to congratulate the science team
Oh, it was
that made
it's
a
incredible.
net plus energy from nuclear
Absolutely
fusion.
incredible.
I want
is
to
the
applaud.
printing press right there.
I want to applaud that team for doing that. I think I want to honor them in some way on this. I mean, even if people don't hear this, it's out there. So we applaud you for that. Congratulations on a monumental feat of discovery and engineering.
The ramifications of what they managed to accomplish are just not fathomable.
It's beyond me. It's beyond any of us, really. I mean, it took how many? It took think about it. It took over a century for that information, that knowledge to culminate. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just that team. It was the people that paved the way before them.
And we hadn't even perfected fission yet.
Yeah. What a fantastic feat. Now we're talking about free energy. Mm-hmm. We have a surplus of energy now.
Yeah.
It's possible. It can happen. The crisis is over. The climate crisis is over.
There are developments to be had in order to make it, feasible on a large scale, but the actual technology itself, what we have been able to achieve, is unfathomable. The sun is everywhere.
Has God been born?
Yes. The sun god.
Unconquered sun. The Son of God. If the sun is God, and nuclear fission is we're just copying a small fraction of what the sun does. Is what these scientists have just created the Son of God? Have they just developed the center of our existence? I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, the sun was God.
Yeah. The Messiah is back.
Has the Messiah
returned? Somebody should let the Jews know.
Well, speaking of Israel.
Be careful.
We're talking about messianism, right?
Messianic
tradition,
yes.
Folklore, myth. I have read recently, I have no idea what the source is, if it's legitimate or not. But you have a lot of these people on the internet, far right people, far left people, religious people. They're talking about how they're trying to create in Israel an artificial body, embryo grown in a lab, no real parents, no real genetic code, mm-hmm. right? Other than what makes it human, I suppose. So maybe genetic code. I'm speaking out of turn. I'm way out of my element here. They want to basically give it its own identity via not environment or development, but through a chip where it just has information embedded in it. And my friend, who isn't Christian, who doesn't follow, the Judeo-Christian, the Abrahamic traditions of, prophecy and whatnot, he thinks that Israel is basically acting as a vessel for, not Satan, but an element of evil in the world. And that Israel will create Yahweh in the flesh, and this being that they're making right now will be the Antichrist, because if he is a computer, he'll be the greatest general ever. He'll be unstoppable.
Right.
And if he is a computer, we won't have enough computational power to stop him, because he could just essentially plug himself in. Now I'm just talking it's such a hot take, but it was really interesting that we're talking so much about the Messiah. People are, they're trying to make their Messiah, which is the Christian's Antichrist. Mm-hmm. And, we're talking about, we have just come up with net power, net energy. Mm-hmm. No, okay, that's funny. We're talking about we're creating more energy than was put in. We're not creating energy. Let's
right.
preface that.
Right.
Energy cannot be created.
We're getting more out of it than we put in.
Correct. It's not so much as being wasted is going to waste.
Yes.
So,
it's viable because there's no
yeah,
waste.
okay.
Or less waste.
But once again, congratulations to that science
Yes.
team. I know we kind of went off on a tangent there, but that's really great. And
It's just incredible.
I did want to bring it in to our conversation that is possibly the next sense of purpose for maybe the purposeless, the non-strivalist, is probably going to worship energy in the future. Because everything's going to rely on this energy. And if it were to possibly go out in any way, like that will collapse the next civilization. Any wobbling, any discrepancy in the consistency of this energy in our vessel, if this is the new liquid that fills our vessel, if that starts to run out, or if that starts to poison or not be a stable source, if the water gets dried up or poisoned or something, if it's no longer viable, that's going to collapse the next civilization.
Esoteric solarism.
Esoteric solarism. We're only at an hour and 20.
Really?
Yeah. Did we have more to cover on this? I know we did. I
didn't have anything specifically laid out. I had a quote from Kierkegaard that was pertinent. Did you get enough of what you had thought about Nietzsche out?
No, but I think it's a lot less relevant.
Okay.
Than what I thought we were going to go along with.
Okay.
So
same with my Kierkegaard stuff here. I really, the only things more that I have are pretty general. I was very interested in this topic because of how broad it was and the direction that we could go with it. But I think it's really interesting, actually, that we kind of got to the crux of it pretty quickly. Part of the reason why I wanted to explore this today is just because as a non-believer, I have people, specifically at my place of work, I have people that are very, very religious, evangelical even, and not in a negative way. I don't think that's negative. A lot of anti-theists, as we called them earlier, a lot of atheists or anti-theists will feel threatened by Christianity being itself, which is evangelical. You know, if you are a Christian, it is part of it is good. It is part of the good to help evangelize others so that others can see the light. Now, there are very bad ways to do that. Just ask the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects that. But I'm getting off topic. So I work with people that are quite Christian and that can be evangelical at times. And it's a question that I ask myself pretty often, actually. You know, what do I believe in? I don't believe in God. I don't have faith that God himself exists. But what I do believe is that there is a power in God. God himself is powerful, even if he doesn't exist. Because if I walk outside and I talk to someone on the street and I ask them, you know, what has God done for you? They'll have answers. They know what God has done for them. Even if God himself doesn't exist, somehow something that doesn't exist did that. The idea of God is God. God doesn't have to exist to be powerful.
You know, I find it funny because in preparation for this, I was just kind of discussing with some of my friends in Germany the topic, you know, because we were talking about, you know, some things. You know, they over there, you know, they think we're kind of strange in America because quite a large portion of our population believes in creationism, like Christian fundamentalism, like Genesis 1:1. Everything is absolutely true.
Ken
right?
Ham.
Well, he's Australian. He's a terrible import.
I know, but Ken Ham's brand is very American.
Well, and then there's Kent Hovned.
I haven't heard him.
Just more creationism. And, like, ignorance. Like, oh, well, the fossils are dated because of the layers that they're in, and the layers are dated because the fossils found in them. And he's like, there is no Mesozoic era. That's all made up. Everyone's just making it up. How do they know how old it is? What, they found a bone in the ground and they don't know. Like,
said by someone who knows nothing about
lithographic stratification apparently doesn't exist. Like, oh, you can't. And, well, he sat there and he claimed that they carbon dated fossils from the Mesozoic era.
Mm-hmm.
No, they didn't. Like, okay, maybe he's confusing it, like conflating the term carbon dating with like radiometric dating, where we would use maybe beryllium, I think 14, to date fossils because it's mineralized. It's you can't carbon date mineral like well, I mean there's carbon in some minerals, but that's besides the point. Carbon dating is only good insofar as at most maybe 50,000 years, but every 10,000 years back that you go, there's a plus or minus, there's a margin for error that almost gets greater as you go back. So when you date something at 50,000 years, it could be 60, it could be 40, like it's plus or minus like 10,000. You know, it's like a ridiculous amount. Right. And so carbon dating is only good for dating relatively new dead things. In that sense. But no, so back to the topic. I was in preparation for this. My friend said that she thinks that religious fundamentalism might lead them into a form of humanity and racism and stuff. You know, a lot of people I talk to don't really have like in-depth conversations with me about these things, but that doesn't bother me at all. I always listen to a lot of people because they might know something that I don't. But I wouldn't go in so far to say that religion itself causes that. That assumes religion by itself has power, right? We talk about religion as if it's some, religion and government and things like that, as if there's some far off entity that actually exists. No, they're literally just people that are playing on emotions. They're manipulating you. It's all just humanity doing it, right? That's why I want to stay away from humanity.
Right.
But, no, I found it funny that you actually just said something along those lines where religion has this kind of power. God has a power over us. God is just the personification of maybe justice. But it depends on what time and place you're in, because God right now is unequivocal love without judgment.
Which is interesting considering
and 100 years ago he was brimfire or hellstone and brimfire. I forget
something like that.
But speaking of religion, I like Kierkegaard. I've read his work. I mean, it's like when I talk about mythology and religion, I'm not looking at it like it's all lies. Like I read before. I study all religions and mythologies in a much more broad stroke manner. I view them all equally in a sense where they're all just mythology. There's something to learn from. They might not be good morals in some
much
cases.
Like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I would disagree with a lot, if not most, of the things from the Bible, as much as I would disagree with a lot, if not most, things from the Vedas. Or, I mean, because if you look at it, everything is historically inaccurate.
Right.
It's not data and statistics, right? So we look at it like that in modern times. If they're all inaccurate as to how the world began and things like that, that undermines the credibility of kind of the rest of it. Because like Ken Ham says in Genesis 1:1, that's like his main thing, is that if you don't believe in the Genesis 1:1, the very beginning of the Bible, then it's unimportant if Jesus existed or not. Like all of everything following is just unimportant. Like Genesis is the foundation for the whole rest of the Bible. Like it references the Messiah, it does all this and that. So I view it in the sense that they're not fact, but they do have truth within them, and it's good to read and learn and interpret the lore and how everything like connects to each other, almost in the same vein that you would do so for Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. There's meaning behind all that stuff. There's symbology. There's esoteric meaning. But I wrote this. This is also from December of 2019. I used to write a lot, I guess, in December 2019. I wrote, "If I was a Christian," that's what this is titled. "If the evidence wasn't so obvious that evolution is true, I would be hard-pressed to believe in anything other than the Christian God. Not for teleological, ontological, and epistemological reasons, but for moral and perhaps traditional reasons. What the Christian faith has provided was an all-encompassing and profoundly meaningful and final ruling authority over man, whose ultimate desire is to rule or to be ruled in or on for varying capacities. I don't know if that last part made much sense.
I get the idea.
You either want to be a god of others or a god for others, sometimes even. Therefore, if I were a Christian, I would first be a Catholic, not only because it is the eldest and most traditional of the Christian varieties, but it does have direct lineage to Jesus of Nazareth. Notice I did not say the Christ. This is via the line of papal succession. Jesus metaphorically gave Peter, the first pope, the keys to heaven, hence why the Vatican's flag has 2 keys upon it. Mass is another reason why I would choose Catholicism over any other form. Mass not only is a simple ritual, it really isn't. I don't know why I wrote that. Mass is quite a complex ritual.
Right.
It is complex in the sense that it sets itself apart by invoking all of the senses with visual, your visual senses with the stained glass, the auditory senses with the singing,
even the smell with the
incense covers the smell, the Eucharist and the Eucharist for the taste, and the holy water for touch. These things, plus when done in Latin, sets Mass far apart from any regular day-to-day activity. The only things I would criticize most of the followers of Roman Catholicism are theological ideas that are gegen, which I will use a German word to the teachings of the church. Gegen just means opposite, but I feel like gegen also has other connotations that are unique, make it unique from English, the English opposite. The Protestants do have an upper hand in not sinning as the main goal, right? Catholics mainly, okay, maybe I'm backed up here. Protestants focus mainly on don't do that because it's sinful. You'll do it against God. They kind of forget that it's to honor God and that their life is to be in worship of God. Protestants sometimes have a better theology or an outlook on actions in terms of faith, whereas Catholics might look towards God as more of the solution to problems, right? Obviously, this is a generalization, but I've observed enough of actual Catholics doing whatever they want because they can just go to confession and get their punishment and go, okay, I can handle that. Right? But also, Calvinists in their belief of predestination seem to be more in line with biblical views, as God is often called the author of the beginning and the end, meaning he already has within his knowledge what he wants to happen, so he has written it down and knows all the events that will ever transpire with no exceptions, surprises, or plan Bs. His omniscience makes for our free will to be simply an illusion, just as a character in any book would think of himself as free. More to come, perhaps. I never really finished that idea, but my idea still stands.
I like where it was going.
Right, that just as in Harry Potter, right, Harry Potter may think he's free, that he's actually acting according to his free will, but J.K. Rowling already wrote everything. She knew exactly where this character was going. Except for, maybe that's a terrible example because the recent development of the changes in these canonical characters that she's made to kind of keep herself up to date with the times. Funny thing, I also, speaking of Harry Potter, men who grew up the millennials that grew up watching Lord of the Rings versus Harry Potter, the Lord of the Rings fans became Christian conservatives. The Harry Potter fans became woke, purple-haired, fat liberals.
That is a hot take right there, and I don't disagree with it.
It's not a hot take.
It's reality.
It's empirical evidence. It's not anecdotal. It's empirical, and I will not elaborate any further. I single-handedly caused the Cambrian explosion. I will not.
And I will not elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that. Now that has been 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
Almost 3 years to the day. That was December 27th, 2019.
Oh,
Actually,
wow. Tomorrow, that's 3 years to the day.
Yeah, actually, the first thing that I read, The Importance of Mythology in the Development of Youth, that was written today, exactly 3 years ago. Which is funny that we talk about that today, exactly 3 years after I wrote that.
It's just like in our first episode. It's all full circle.
Are you talking about the pilot or the actual published?
Our
results?
actual published first
okay,
episode.
yeah.
We're all going, it's all full circle.
Yeah.
It always comes back around somehow. Ouroboros.
Ouroboros. Ouroboros.
Aurora
The snake
Borealis.
eating its own side. Aurora Borealis. The anemone. But, yeah, obviously, like I said, that was almost 3 years ago to the day. And I don't even know if... I think if religion is to be used, because I don't believe in spirituality. I think that there is a spirit within each civilization that kind of motivates it to do the certain things it does. It almost brings us like a joy in terms of cultural traditions and things like that. It's a spirit, but it's a motivation in a sense. I will agree with the part about mass. The only part that I might actually go along with now is the mass. When you talk about spiritualism, really it is something completely separate from the physical world. You're talking about metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're talking about metaphysics, you kind of want to do ritualistic things to put you in this setting. You're getting yourself ready. You're preparing yourself for... Well, the whole ritual of Mass is to ready yourself for communion with God.
Mm-hmm.
The crescendo, the climax of Mass isn't the singing. It's not the message. It's the Eucharist. It's the bonding together of souls, in a sense, towards the same ideal, towards the same singular entity. Right? And so when you walk in, you clean yourself and you smell good for the Lord as if you were a sacrifice, and smoke going up to God, as it were, in the Old Testament, right? That incense is covering you. It's masking the scent of your sin, right? And then you go and you sing, you invoke the ideal by worshiping it, right? You're almost calling God when you're worshiping Him. Mm-hmm. There's a song, I can only vaguely remember the meaning of it, but it's like, come, like we're waiting for you, come, and you're calling God to finish His work, right? So you're calling Him, you've cleaned yourself, you're smelling good for Him, he's here, he's arriving, and the best that we can almost get, right, after all this singing and like the overall appearance of the place, like we built this house for Him, we're clean in it, and it's inviting the Lord home, right? Because His house isn't on earth, but
His house is everywhere, but this is the manifestation.
Right.
Of
Yes, this is why the church was called God's house,
right?
Kind of thing. But even though they warned against that in their own books, right? Which I'll get into Christianity in a second here. Like just in general, the history, right? But then as you have finished speaking God's word and His promises, and He is now here, and you have evoked Him, you will now consume Him. Meaning that now He is within you, a part of you, right? And they ask you not to take it if you're not ready to receive communion and stuff like that. But you're doing that in remembrance of God and His work, right? You are now ingesting the Lord in a sense, so that you can almost live as He did. It's so strange because, I'm looking at it from an outside view. Obviously, there's going to be theological differences if any religious person is Catholic or Protestant or even Orthodox. If they're listening to this, they'll be like, well, no, that's not exactly what it is. I know what it is. But I went to a Christian school. I understand, do this
We
in
both
remembrance
did.
of me. Well, right. We understand what it is in terms of their lore, but I'm looking at it from the outside going, wow, this is so similar to almost every other religion, right? Now I'll go into the Bible. I always find it amusing or interesting that what Christians consider the Bible to be. Because obviously you have apocryphal books, like each main sect.
Mm-hmm.
The Protestants, the Catholics, and the Orthodox. They all have their own books. All have their own, the Catholics have 6 more books than Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
Tobit, Judith, Sirach, Wisdom, and the First and Second Maccabees in specific. Right.
Same with the Masons too. And I would go so far as to say that in the Masonic side of things, there's a lot of ritualism there. There's some ritualism and some esotericism that brings you closer to the source material.
Well, that's called sacred geometry.
Exactly.
Which we can do an episode on that if we really want to go into some
that would be interesting. Actually, we should
just let's
write that down.
Write that down. Jamie, write that down. It would be more so of a I'd be interested in doing maybe a podcast on hey, we're just clicking on random Wikipedia articles and talking about them, doing a series like that.
I like that because that's what I do in my free time.
Yeah,
just read about things that are totally unrelated.
Go on Wikipedia or go on random articles, right?
Yeah.
And just pull up stuff and talk about it. Yeah, that would be fun. Like a series, like 3 episodes of us just kind of going on a tangent.
Yeah, we're good at that.
But no, I'm talking about Christians will look at Paul's writings and they will be like, yes, this is God's word, right? And I don't think Paul wrote those letters to the churches with the intention of his word being God's word. Now they'll go, well, God made sure that the Bible is how it is now. And it's funny that they say that because they sit there and they'll go, oh, the Message version isn't God's version. If they're like KJV only, right? Mm-hmm. Every other version is corrupt and we shouldn't use it. And I'm like, okay, in that same vein, you're sitting there and you read God's word is incorruptible and that he, all of God's word is exactly how he made it, right? And that Paul talks about it in the New Testament, that the word of God is incorruptible, and they reference that to prove, it's that circular reasoning, right? They prove that God's word is untaintable by using God's word, right? And I sit there and I asked family members tonight, actually, before this podcast, I said, okay, do you believe that the word of God is corruptible? And they said, no, absolutely not. And I said, well, we just talked about how all these versions are corrupt and that you won't read them. And they sat there and they went, oh, wow, yeah, that's right. And I said, well, then you could talk about the meaning, like the 4 layers of meaning and stuff. But then I went, well, okay, here's my thought on it. The word of God is corruptible because God spoke everything into existence. And sin corrupted the spoken word of creation.
Because it was through man.
Yeah. And therefore, anything that is God's, that man can possibly touch, we can destroy. And I'm not saying that because we have so much power. I'm just saying that because in Christian lore, we're like the corrupt, Like Satan didn't actually do that to us. Satan actually hadn't fallen away from God yet. In the serpent in the Garden of Eden I don't think he's Satan. Because that hadn't happened yet.
Right.
Wild. But anyhow, I don't think the the letters written by Paul should be considered biblical canon. I don't think that's God's authority. I don't think that's God's word. I mean, he was writing on behalf of the new church and whatnot, but that's a history of the early church, but the history of the church is really in Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, right? I think they surmised it was written by Luke or somebody, which, how did they know? The most original documents are 30 years after Christ,
right.
at least. But and then you have books like The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross by John Allegro, I think it was. He researched the Dead Sea Scrolls and he found that, oh wow, all this Jesus stuff and the disciples' names, they are actually just colloquialisms and pseudonyms for hallucinogenic mushrooms. And so the early Jesus cult was a shamanic mushroom cult that was guised as the Jewish Messiah.
Right.
I have his book. It's quite interesting. I'm actually going through my library in alphabetical order reading. I'm on my 4th book. It's by Muammar al-Gaddafi. That's why he's in the A's. It was his green book. But
green book.
Yeah, I've been through several books. I think next up is The Divine Comedy, and then there's Rules for Radicals by Alinsky. He's a communist.
I saw that at Barnes & Noble the other day.
Oh, it's great to learn leftist tactics. And it's playing out now.
Okay. So it's garbage. I got it.
It's absolute garbage. But I have so many notes in it. I mean, it was like, this subversion is actually happening. He was like, get in the university. He was like one of the first ones to be like, get in the universities and do this and that.
Right.
And then after that is the Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. And he was an ordained minister. He was part of the team that was deciphering the scrolls. It wasn't like some crackpot.
Right.
He wrote that in the 40s.
Very interesting.
Yeah. This is before the hippie 60s
right.
and all the mushroom talk. This is
when you would think that would crop up.
Yeah, this is some guy in the late 40s going, oh my gosh, I'm reading this. And they're using the names and locations and things like they're using the proper names or proper names of things. But it's like this is all just symbolic.
Right.
He's like, these aren't to be read as historical happenings. These are metaphorical completely.
Right.
That was quite interesting.
That is
Jesus is just Zoroaster.
I was telling a buddy of mine that the other day. He had no idea what Zoroastrianism was.
Well, have you seen the commonality between Zoroaster? I mean, born to a virgin, started his ministry at 33, like did all of this. He like performed magic in a foreign land like years before, and it's not canonical, but it's thought of. You know, Jesus did miracles when he was
very
a kid.
Interesting, and it's the first religion to have the dichotomy between good and evil.
Right, and there was Satan, and there like so many commonalities just between the character of Jesus and the character of Zoroaster. I thought that was insane. I mean, that like leads me to just know that inherently that
and that
Christianity
that
is
same,
not like a real thing.
That same person that I was talking to that had asked me, why don't you think that God is real or that Christianity is true? And I said, well, for example, Zoroastrianism. Yeah. It draws so many parallels between Christianity, and same with the Epic of Gilgamesh. Right. There are characters in that are just reflections of the characters in the early Bible. And to me, it is so self-evident that the Bible is a collection of stories that are just snowballed from stories that were told before, that were snowballed from stories that were told before. I mean, these are stories that predate the existence of Jesus by thousands of years.
Right.
That are the same stories that had to do with Jesus. Right. Dying and being resurrected, or being born to an obscure person but it being put in a basket and floating down the Nile. I mean, these are things that that doesn't just come up from nowhere several times isolated from each other.
Yeah. And it's funny because that's why I said earlier that the gods and these mythological heroes may have been real people. Like these may have been actual real events, and they have just kind of been given extra flavor. Right. Because the illustrations are great and they're entertaining in that sense, because you want to continue to convey the meaning beyond. Right. That's why
it's the longest game of telephone.
Exactly. It's an entertaining game of telephone. It's a fun Mad Lib kind of story,
right. Well,
if you will.
A perfect example, because I just thought of this. A perfect example is how Christianity has come in recent years, ever since 2015, since the Supreme Court ruling of same-sex couples are legal federally. God before that was very anti-homosexual, or at least it was understood that that was not Christian.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
But now God is okay with that. Even the Pope, the highest authority in Christendom.
Christ, yeah.
Yes, the Vicar of Christ, the highest authority in all of Christendom, has said that that is okay. Same with abortion.
Yeah.
Which for hundreds of years, thousands of years, that has not been the case.
Right. It is essentially the deification of the self and the democratization of the ideal.
Exactly. Yes, the democratization of the ideal. That is the best way to put that.
Because everyone deified themselves, right? So their opinion is all equally valid, right? And so what that does is instead of elevating the ideal, it just crushes it.
It dilutes it.
Flattens it. It makes it so that it is nothing. There's nothing to achieve. And so whatever you do must be the correct action and thereby must be acted upon. Like,
and that's why in what I was reading from my writing earlier, where I was talking about how we now know that God isn't real, or that we've forced the supernatural and God into the corner, it's because it's not potent anymore. Yep. It's a husk of itself, and it only serves to gratify the ego. If you walk down the street and you ask an average Christian, why do you believe in God? Or what does your belief in God do for you? They say, oh, well, I don't want to go to hell. Or it helps me deal with life because life is hard. I know that I have God to lean on because God will support me. It's me, 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 me.
Well, if you even ask the zealous, it's almost like an element of masochism in it. They want to be subservient. They want to be ruled or enslaved. There
has to be
by
a higher ideal.
Because I'm a bad boy. I'm a sinner. I need to be punished.
Masochistic. That is
But okay,
I'll agree with that.
Okay, there are multiple layers as to why I don't believe, right? And the main factor, the main one, was the realization that evolution is true. Because
for the both of us.
Yeah, in my childhood, in my upbringing, if you didn't believe in Genesis 1:1, the rest of the Bible doesn't make any sense. And that actually makes sense. That stands. Because if you don't believe the Bible in its entirety, as canon, as all the lore all together, then, yeah, why would you believe the rest of it? Because if God didn't create the earth in 6 days, 6,000 years ago, then, yeah, he didn't really do a lot else.
And it destroys the validity of it if you are consistently moving the goalpost. Oh, well, we know that the universe is however old because there are galaxies or ethereal or celestial bodies thousands of light years away. We know that if there's a planet that's 10,000 light years away, it's at least 10,000 years old. That's already older than the Bible. It's that simple.
It's the simple math of it.
Yeah.
You know, the speed of light and the distance that object is, and you can measure all of that.
Well, how do you know it's that far away? Simple math.
Actually,
use a protractor.
We're just faking it. It's all just firmament.
Yep.
Challenger 2 hit the firmament, bounced right off of it, and exploded.
The Earth is flat too.
Yeah.
And we faked the moon landing.
Yeah. Duh.
There's a person that I work with. He quite literally believes. He doesn't believe that the Earth is flat, but he will die on this hill. He believes that the Earth, we can't leave Earth. He thinks that it just isn't possible.
Space magic, huh?
Yes, space magic. He believes that we faked the moon landing and that no one is ever able to leave the four corners of the Earth because it says that in the Bible.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense now. I was like, okay, what kind of conspiracies does he believe in? And then it was like, oh, the biblical conspiracy.
Yes.
Okay, back to my point. Back to why, right? Yeah, evolution, like you said, simple mathematics and things like that are very damning evidence.
Yes.
And if evolution happened, which it did, that means that there are quite literally billions of years of death, disease, mutation, chaos, destruction, floods, fires. A lot of dead things.
Mm-hmm.
Death apparently wasn't supposed to happen until Adam and Eve sinned. What was going on? Why, if God intended for there to be peace, right, why would he have created carnivores? And obviously Adam and Eve, when they were eating fruit, they were killing the cells that live within those vegetables and digesting them.
They were interrupting the life cycle of that tree.
Right. That not everything was eternal, right? And so maybe somebody would have to reinterpret the Bible and be like, well, evolution's true, but Adam and Eve are divine. Like, humans are different. Why are we just apes? Why are we primates? Because you have to go into the taxonomy, the systematic classification of life. If you don't follow that, like if you don't go, okay, yes, I am a eukaryote. Yes, I am this. Yes, I am a synapsid. Yes, I am this. Yeah, you are related. You're related to everything on the planet. Mm-hmm. You are part of the co-evolution of species on this planet. You are not unique.
And it's designed to work that way.
You are unique, but you're intertwined with them. There's nothing about you. Like, God is quite unoriginal if everything is built out of carbon. And if everything has DNA and nothing is really that unique. Because the DNA, like, let's just say DNA number 1 controls X, Y, and Z. Well, it does that and everything else too.
And the most common argument that I hear that people tend to not be able to wrap their heads around is that, well, so you're saying that fish just walked out of the water.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite.
And grew legs and turned into apes. And then those apes they stood up on their back legs and turned into people. No.
Oh, but they'll see the point that
what are frogs?
Yeah, they'll see the point that microevolution happens though. They're like, oh yeah, animals adapt. It's like, okay,
Darwin's finches.
Yeah, and then we're like, okay, well, give it the millions of years that the stratigraphic layers of the Earth tell us.
It's simple. It's so simple.
Why are there different fossils and different layers? Well, there's not different fossils and different layers. In fact, there's a tree right here that grows through 6 of them. You don't know if any of those fossils had any children. I mean, we don't. We don't have their genetic code in order to tell that. But pretty damn likely.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty damn likely.
I mean, even just scale it down. Scale it down to, Cro-Magnon man in caves in France.
No, those were... All right, we're back after some technical difficulties, but I don't know. Go ahead and say something.
So, scale it down, right? If we look at Cro-Magnon man in caves in France, thousands of years ago, right?
Those are just humans, by the way.
The things that they were doing are so starkly different from the things that we do now. Those were people. And if they weren't modern man, they were a proto-man. But they had similarities and they had differences.
Right.
But thousands of years of natural processes have sharpened that creature into us sitting here.
Yeah, they almost characterize evolution with like a hyper-evolution. Like, oh, fish just flew out of the water and became a bird. And it's like, not quite so. Because they weren't fish back then.
Right.
And they weren't amphibians back then. And they weren't reptiles. They were reptile-like.
Yeah,
they were like everything. They're kind of taking like what we have today and pushing it back. Mm-hmm. And putting what we have today in the past. That's why like they used to think dinosaurs were just giant lizards. Well, no, they weren't. They were actually birds. Dinosaurs are birds. But there's that, right? I don't believe in the Bible or Christianity or any religion because evolution has prescribed facts of how we got here. Right? Mm-hmm. Then there are the obvious contradictions within every religion that they have, right? And stuff that just doesn't make sense, right? And so, for me, it's like Jesus was just a regular guy in history. Not a regular guy. If he did exist. Guy, yeah. If he did exist, it's impressive. He left a ripple on history, right?
The biggest ripple, I would argue.
Oh, yeah, like you said earlier. It was probably the most influential But yeah, there's just metaphysical elements to it
Yeah.
all that just don't align with science, and then there's the historicity of things. So, again, like I said, I don't think that it was necessarily written and meant to be obeyed and all encompassing. I think it's kind of, you're only looking at the superficial layer of it, the first layer of it, when you start to read that stuff. You need to go into the deeper layers, and you'll find out that, okay, none of that stuff is actually real, because if I'm only interpreting the first layer of it, I'm missing the point. And so I think I will end there. I'm not religious because of those things.
And I agree.
Has nothing to do with my upbringing. I am not anti my own childhood. I think I was fortunate to go to a Christian school. In fact, I excelled in math and history and English and all the subjects, but I was educationally retarded in terms of science. But didn't stop me from going on YouTube.
Right.
Right. So
There's so much to be learned from YouTube.
YouTube.
And that's why you clicked on this video.
Well, yeah, honestly, I think there might be something to be said about making some sort of online university that's generally free, or just like you just pay basically the access that just holds up the place, right? And I wish it was like a authentic degree that you could actually use.
An internet degree.
Yeah.
I have a master's of memology.
The memetics.
Memetics.
All right, yeah, we're at 2 hours. I think if you are listening this far in, congratulations, because for the last half hour it was, well, it's all unscripted, but this was just totally off topic.
Yes. We kind of came to our conclusions, or we kind of wrapped up, put a pretty little bow on it, about halfway through this, actually.
Right. So we are an empty vessel right now. We need to come up with something to fill it. And filling it is almost a necessity in order to fulfill our biological imperative through a emotion, essentially. Our spirituality, our metaphysics are a lot of times not ration-based, but rather emotional.
Right.
And as we have become more complex as organisms, right, the biological imperative must be fulfilled in more complex ways. It's not that we are doing better at it necessarily because of our developments of instinct, emotion, and rationale. They should aim back towards that, and I think they do. I think it just can be convoluted when one is acting out of balance with the others, and maybe it's not a balance. Maybe rationale should conquer them all. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should really embrace rationalism. I think we would find that we would act quite differently if we embrace rationalism, but that's something for a more rational mind to conquer in the future, because we've only encroached rationale as a species. We don't even know if it's good. We don't know if we're on the wrong mountain peak. Rationale might be our undoing.
AI,
our final invention.
Yeah, AI is pure rationale. It knows no emotion. It knows no instinct other than what is programmed to it.
Yeah, it's almost the un-animal.
The anti-animal.
The apathist.
And that is a good place to end.
All right. Till next time.